Hi, Ian. So yeah, we're going to speak today about stopping messaging fraud by going beyond the messaging content. And I'd like to start by looking at NDLC. It's something that came up in, I think, almost any session today. There seems to be consensus that it's a robust system. You have a vetting of the sending entities. You have the phone numbers that are used as originators are declared in advance. The data is used downstream by messaging hubs and carriers to identify the bad actors and to stop them, but still there is fraud going around. So in this landscape, what are the common attack vectors that are still possible? How is that possible?
Yeah, sure. So there's been a lot of talk about vetting today, and I think vetting is a great product for helping identify spammers or likely spammers and limit their access to messaging, as well as helping maximize the access to legitimate companies who deserve to be able to send the volumes that they deserve to be able to send. However, vetting is not enough. Vetting does very little, if anything, to limit access to 10DLC messaging to threat actors. Now, I know John this morning talked about identifying bad actors through vetting, and that is true. There is identification of some bad actors, but there's a spectrum of bad actors, right? There are bad actors who are repeat TCPA violators, and there are bad actors who are cyber criminals. And there's a big difference between those two. Because cyber criminals should be in jail versus the folks that maybe should just be fined. And cyber criminals do not care about vetting. They do not care about 10DLC registration. They do not care about the rules. So how are they gaining access? Primarily multiple forms of account takeover, whether that's direct account takeover of a login and password to a CPaaS platform, whether that's buying a compromised CPaaS API key off of a variety of different places on the internet, whether that's social media platforms, whether that is on a open web threat actor shop. It's important to note very little of this is taking place on the dark web. It's all out there if you know where to look. It's not difficult to get an API key for 10DLC for $50 in the threat actor forum and be able to start sending messaging right away and have somebody else, some legitimate company with some trusted connection, pay for the pleasure of having their account taken over. So it's a problem I think we need to focus on a bit more. I think we need to recognize as an industry that we're under siege. We have adversaries out there who are trying to break our platforms and abuse them to drive a variety of nefarious activities, including consumer harm, and it's getting worse. And so what I'd really like to see the industry be able to do is take more of an offensive stance against these threat actors as opposed to a purely defensive stance of how many more messages can we block, how many more accounts can we shut down. I think we want to try and go further left of the problem and try and collaborate between the messaging platforms and the carriers and possibly law enforcement to make that happen.
Right. So this messaging fraud, it has an impact both on end users who are victims of smishing attacks and fraudulent financial activities, but also on the service providers who suffer at a minimum from a reputation perspective. How does this impact look in more detail?
That's a big question. There's a lot of impacts. There's the most obvious that we've talked about across the course of the day, consumer harm, so identity theft of funds, setting up synthetic accounts with people's real identities to launder money, move money out of the country. One of the more common attacks we're seeing right now is called pig butchering, which is essentially a long-form version of social engineering. It's sort of a new spin on the romance scam where somebody texts you and says, hey, what's up? And then they think that they know you, and over weeks or months even, they will gain your trust. They will fatten the pig until they butcher it by getting you to transfer a bunch of crypto funds to them. So there's a lot of consumer harm that's happening. There's a lot of people's financial lives getting ruined as part of this activity. The thing I'm shocked that we're not talking about more, that I don't hear a lot about, is the largest single fraud event in U.S. history that took place over the course of the pandemic, a good portion of it over SMS, and that's unemployment insurance fraud. So you will have seen in Simeon's presentation earlier, his screen cap of the EDD text message. So that's the California Employment, I'm gonna forget what the acronym is. It's the California Employment Development Division. It's basically where people get automated unemployment payments. Bank of America actually issues them on a prepaid gift card, and they go out to folks who are on unemployment. So scammers figured out that over the course of the pandemic across all 50 states, they could start phishing people's unemployment accounts, get unemployment payments rerouted to them, then they could call back in and say, hey, I never got my unemployment payment. The government says, yeah, we sent it to this address. No, that's not my address. I got scammed. And they'll get a second bite at the apple, okay? The losses to this attack are estimated up to 400 billion. Billion with a B, billion. It's a serious problem, and all people want to talk about is those evil corporations that stole from PPP loans, which was a much smaller set of scams. So again, a lot of that was taking place over SMS, and it hasn't stopped. It slowed down when the additional unemployment payments stopped, ironically on Labor Day, but it has not stopped. That scam continues to this day, and we continue to see it on SMS. So that's another big one. There's a corporate impact, right? There's a lot of spear phishing going around. Every other day you hear about a data breach in the news that was a result of SMS spear phishing of some corporate employees. So that's a growing problem. It's impacting people in this industry. You all probably know who you are, if you're getting impacted by it, but it's also impacting all kinds of different companies. It's impacting banks, it's impacting technology companies, it's impacting people like Microsoft. So again, a lot of this is taking place over SMS. And it's a very negative impact on these organizations. And then you've got sort of the less tangible stuff, but the stuff we know is really bad. You've got brand damage to the carriers, right? I mean, that's just it. When people get text messages that they don't like, everybody loves to hate their carrier and they want to blame them, and it doesn't help with that brand damage. I think probably something near and dear to the hearts of this room is, and we've talked about this a little bit, erosion of trust in messaging, right? That 98% open rate. We can't let SMS turn into email. And I know folks that know me have heard me saying this for years in this industry, but I'm going to keep saying it until we stop turning SMS into email, because it's not going the right direction with the increases in attacks that are coming across. We don't want to lose that trusted messaging channel. And I got to tell you, the threat actors know the marketing stats like that better than we do. They know it because it works. They've got that engagement. They know that people are much more likely to respond to something on SMS or likely to click a link, especially if they send it at the right time of day. So it's a serious problem that we need to continue to invest in new tools to address.
Right. Let's also touch on the FCC report and order addressing robotext. What's the impact of the report and order on the messaging industry?
Well, let's talk about that word for a minute, robotext. I hate that word. We need to eradicate that word from our vocabulary, because what it implies is this is just the flip side of the robocall coin. And then it's the same problem just on SMS. Oh, just do the same thing you did. Just make up stir shaken for SMS. Just implement the same kind of controls. Everybody in this room knows that's not accurate. And I think one of the bigger problems that we have is keeping these regulators educated on how the technology works and what's actually possible and what's not. I don't think it's a bad thing that the FCC's getting involved and is saying we have to do something about this. I think they've recognized that this is a problem that we all have to face and we can't sweep under the rug. But if they're going to, put out edicts that the carriers must do X, Y, or Z, they've got to make sense. They've got to be things that are actually going to solve the problem and aren't just going to cause a whole bunch of wasted time and money. So the FCC is going to do ultimately what the FCC is going to do, and this industry is going to have to respond to that. And this industry is going to have to invest more money in new solutions, more collaborative solutions. What we can't do is just keep beating our head against the wall and thinking that doing the same thing we did yesterday is going to change. We have to evolve, because I'm telling you, the threat actors are evolving, and they talk to each other, and they train each other. I mean, you can go to college for being a phisher online, right? They have training manuals. They have a manual on how to better spam T-Mobile versus Verizon because of how they're different networks. They know how these networks work, and that's a serious problem, and we have to recognize that these adversaries have to be treated as adversaries.
If we move then to the solution space, in your experience, what are some of the tools to address messaging fraud in general, then also the FCC report and order requirements in particular?
Yeah, so there's, in our world at WMC, there's a few different areas that we feel we can impact, or we feel that we have some influence to impact. First of all, we like to try and go as far left of the problem as possible, right? Start at the beginning. Try and get to it before it starts, right? And this is where we see a real need to impact this account takeover problem with these API keys at the CPaaS level, and looking at what tools are available to identify who these adversaries are and take some kind of action against them, beyond just identifying that account's been taken over, shut it down, wait till the next one gets taken over. So what a lot of you may not know is the FBI does go after phishers, right? They do. It's at a field office level, and it's determined by each field office what cases they want to open, but they do go after phishers. They have certain field offices that do focus on these things specifically. But typically they need a referral from somebody who can express some level of financial harm, some level of financial damage. Now, that's easier for some industries than others. It's pretty easy for the banking industry to be able to chalk that up. It may be a little bit more difficult for the wireless industry. But I think as we look at greater collaboration, I think we have to look at using law enforcement as a tool to go to the source of the problem. So the carriers today, they do collaborate with law enforcement going after phishers, but they're going after people that are phishing their employees on internal systems, and they're going after people that are phishing their customers pretending to be pick your carrier. What they're not doing is going after the phishers that are pretending to be Bank of America and are abusing the carrier network to perpetrate their fraud. But what you've got to understand is that an AT&T customer is also a Bank of America customer, right? They have a common customer. Every banking customer has a cell phone, and I think both entities have a duty to protect and to hopefully collaborate to protect. So, looking into threat actor attribution, looking into researching the tactics, techniques, and procedures that these threat actors are using to better understand how their attacks work and better unmask who they are so that data can be provided to law enforcement, I think is something we really need to explore, not as just individual companies, but as an industry, because it is possible. WMC Global does contribute to putting threat actors in jail for phishing. It's something we've done multiple times in multiple countries. So it is possible, but somebody or some group of entities needs to pick up the responsibility and say, we're going to focus on this as a way to go as far left as possible and attack the problem at the source. So that's number one. That's not going to solve everything. We're not going to catch everybody, and there's a new scammer born every day. So there's no silver bullet. The second area that can be impacted, I think, is within all these platforms is when the message is in transit. And we've got a lot of really good SMS firewall vendors between Enea, Proofpoint, Real Networks Context, Mavenir Spam Shield. The list goes on. And just because spam and phishing is getting through doesn't mean these companies don't have good technology and they don't have good solutions. What I find, and what some of you may not be aware of, is a lot of these platforms are flagging a lot of messaging as suspicious, but they don't have the confidence to fully say, yes, we must block this. They don't have that confidence, and the risk is too high. They're going to block some legitimate content. But if you look at that traffic that's flagged as suspicious, there's a lot of phishing in there. There's a lot of stuff that if there was just a little bit more intelligence to give a little bit more confidence about blocking, if that data was available, it could be utilized to get more aggressive. Now, I also recognize that sometimes it's the legal and regulatory folks that are holding some of these companies back, and I think that needs to be part of the dialogue. But there are additional intelligence signals out there that are underutilized or unutilized around number intelligence, and other intelligence signals that I think need to be considered and need to be discussed. And there's various vendors that can provide some of that, and I know, Gadlin, you'll talk about some of that in a little bit as well. And certainly we have data that we contribute to that as well. And then finally, it's also looking beyond, as the title says, beyond the message content, right? What's the payload? Where does that short URL go? Because in looking at message content and looking at volumetrics, you don't know what's behind that short URL. And many times these short URLs are set up to dynamically redirect you to various types of content depending on a whole bunch of circumstances that makes it difficult for platforms to actively detect what's sitting behind them. And sometimes these short URLs are actually the LinkedIn shortener or the Twitter shortener where it's been shortened on that platform and then copy and pasted into a text message so it looks like a really legitimate message. It would be very risky to block. So I do think that anybody who's inspecting traffic needs to invest in partnering with a URL interrogation platform, a platform that's going to explode that URL, get to its natural endpoint, is not going to get tripped up in all the threat actor obfuscation techniques they use to try and hide themselves, and use to make it look like, oh, this is just a legitimate website if you're not coming from the right type of device, or a variety of other criteria they use to try and hide themselves. But there's a lot of work in that space we're doing and other companies are doing to look at that and to enhance how we can look into these text messages. Also looking at the other payload, which is a phone number, which is a callback number in the text message. So we see a lot of what we call smish to vish, right? Where it's saying, Citibank alert, you have a charge for $42.80 on your Target account. Did you make this charge Y or N? Doesn't matter what you respond. As soon as you respond, they know they've got a live one. And then they say, okay, call this number and we're gonna get you into the security center. And then it moves from there. So I think we have to figure out how do we inspect beyond just the initial text message? How do we go a little bit deeper and identify some of these multi-message chains and stop it before the chain gets out of control? Or if that phone number is in the initial text message and just says, hey, call the security center, call back, what intel do we have about that number? right? What else do we know about it? What could be another indicator that this is a fraud number that you're about to engage with and you're about to move from an SMS channel to a voice channel? And I think there's intelligence out there that can be acquired, and there's new types of analytics that can be put in place to take a look at that kind of content as well.
Yeah, and to build on that a little, so definitely phone number intelligence can help with identifying some of this fraud. And the goal here is a specific text message legitimate? Does it come from a sender ID that is a valid number, or maybe it's a number that was associated with a spam campaign recently? Or if we're looking at the destination number, does that number, is it a normal telephone number, or is it a premium rate or a high-cost destination someone is trying to defraud from a financial perspective? Or in the context of high-value transactions like a one-time password that is supposed to verify a bank transfer, then is the destination phone number maybe SIM swapped recently, or was it ported recently? Because this is common. These are common scenarios for account takeover attacks. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think there's a lot of value in looking at the B number, right, and saying, well, what are the flags that are on this number? There are certain subscribers that are more likely to receive malicious messaging within a particular time window, depending on what websites they've been entering data into or what other types of systems they've been interacting with. We see these hybrid attacks where you get an email pretending to be UPS, you put your phone number into that website, and then you get a text message afterwards, right? And it moves from email to text message. Well, we can see, right? WNC's platform can see a lot of those phone numbers and when they're being put into these scam sites. And so that's another signal, right, that just says, here's another data point. It doesn't mean block every message to this number. It means if you have a suspicious message routed to this number, maybe think a little harder about blocking it in your algorithm, right? And maybe you need other signals on top of that, but when you bring them together, it gives you confidence to block. And that's what we really need, because I see so much stuff that's not getting blocked that should be, that we could block if we had better automation.
Perfect. So if we were to summarize our discussion here, what would be your tips for the industry to successfully block messaging fraud?
Well, we need more collaboration, right? We need more meetings like this. We need more meetings like MOG. We need more data feedback loops between entities. We need vendors and carriers and CPaaS platforms doing better data sharing, doing better integrations, and SMS firewalls, and everybody in between. Again, we're an industry under attack. We have active adversaries out there that are trying to break our systems, steal from us, and steal from our customers, and we have to treat it as such. And so, to my second point, this is not just a mobile problem. This is not just a telecom problem. This is a cybersecurity problem, and we've got to think about it like that. We've got to treat it accordingly, and I just don't feel like we have been thus far. We may have been in little pockets, and individual companies or individual people in individual companies have, but as an industry, I don't think we've been viewing it like that, and I don't think we've been collaborating to the level that we could be. And I think it sends a really good message to the FCC if we can drive that kind of collaboration. And then finally, we got to keep educating the regulators. And this is not just about the FCC. You've got 50 states AGs, you've got the National Association of Attorneys General, you've got individual regulators in individual states beyond just the AG level. You've got the Unemployment Insurance Fraud Task Force, that's a mouthful, led by the Department of Justice. They need to be educated. And to some extent, so does law enforcement too, right? Like, I spend a lot of time educating these folks, and every time I give a presentation, somebody learns something, and it's shocking to me how little these government organizations know about our industry, and that's a problem if they're going to be regulating it.
Agree. Collaboration, information sharing is key. So, I think we can open for questions.
Actually, there's one question with the running out of time.
Yeah.
Is there a question? Okay. I guess thank you so much.
Perfect.